Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Hannah Cattell and this is my first video. Today I want to talk about what a costume designer does. What's their role, what's their job description, and what are a few other jobs that are similar but have distinct differences. Some of these may seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people, even in the industry, kind of get these mixed up. If you're just getting started in the industry, or maybe you're still in school, and thinking about going into costume design, I hope this can give a little clarity and maybe guide you in the direction of what job is best for you. To give some background, I'm a costume designer for film and television, and I've been working here in New York City for the last 10 years on union and non-union shoots. And this is Danzig, and he's probably gonna pop in and out, so just pretend he's magical in the cuts. Of course, I have to note that these are all my observations and my ideas about this, and other people have their own definitions and ideas about these jobs. So please make sure to do your own research too. This is just for fun and a jumping off point for you to look this stuff up on your own. Other notes here, I'm gonna primarily in this video and any future videos be talking about costume design for film and television only. I don't do a lot of theater design. That being said, if you guys do have theater specific questions, I'd be happy to maybe bring on some of my more theater oriented colleagues in the future and they can help you out with that. Also, for the later part of this video where I'm describing some of the more specific job names, I'm going to be using the definitions and terms that we use here in New York City only. Other countries and even other parts of the United States use slightly different terminology. The jobs are all mostly the same, but there are a few differences. So if you notice that, just keep that in mind. I'm going to start with a broad, simple description of what costume design is, and then go into a few jobs that are not costume design, but I feel like get used interchangeably at times. Hopefully this will kind of paint a clearer picture and help you decide if costume design is what you're into or maybe one of these other jobs. First, what costume design is. So costume design, according to Wikipedia, is the creation of clothing for the overall appearance of a character or performer. In many cases, it may contribute to the fullness of the artistic visual world, which is unique to a particular theatrical or cinematic production. So basically, a costume designer's job is to design the looks for each character within that production. We're given a script and we're given an overall aesthetic that's determined by the creative team as a whole. That can be directors, writers, production designers, costume designers, etc. And our job is to design each character's look or each world's look if you're doing a larger scale production, and translate that into clothing. So since every project is different, every budget is different, every story is different, every project requires kind of a different set of tasks from the costume designer. For example, a big budget, huge Hollywood sci-fi feature may require you to design and build an entire world from scratch, but budget and assistance are no object. So that's one set of tasks. Whereas on another shoot, you may have a really low budget indie tiny rom-com where all the clothing is purchased from stores, but you have no time, money, or assistance. So those are both costume design jobs, but they're totally different skill sets. And as a costume designer, you need to be prepared for basically those and everything in between. Now, these might sound totally different, and they are, but at the core, the job is still the same, where you're telling the story through costume, and that's kind of the key point. Now, for some people, this constant flux and change in job requirements can be really stressful, but some people like the challenge, and if you're that kind of people, maybe this is for you. Second, what a costume designer is not. So next I'm going to go over what are jobs that are confused often with a costume designer but are not the same job. Fashion designer. Fashion designers design clothing for real people to wear, whereas costume designers design clothing for characters in a story. If a fashion designer is working under their own label, then they're informed only by their own aesthetic and design from their own ideas. And if they're working for under a larger label, then they're designing under the aesthetic of that label. Whereas a costume designer is designing for a script specifically and under the aesthetic that's determined by the production as a whole. That being said, there are some instances where this overlaps, like Jean-Paul Gaultier's costumes for The Fifth Element, or the fact that Alexander McQueen designed all of his collections based around really complex stories and historical research that he did himself. But with very few exceptions, I would say that the difference is fashion designers work in the fashion world and design for real people to wear and purchase retail, whereas costume designers design in the fictional world and design costumes for fictional characters to wear only for that production and not to be remade and mass made and sold retail. Stylist. Here's another one that gets used a lot interchangeably with costume designer, and there are a lot of similarities, but fundamentally they're different jobs. Stylists usually pull from fashion labels to put together looks, usually for editorial, sometimes for advertising, and sometimes for private clients like celebrities. The key difference to remember here is that in most cases, a stylist is pulling from pre-designed garments and maybe trying to follow a certain aesthetic, but isn't necessarily trying to create a story with the clothes. And like fashion designers, they're usually pulling a lot from their own aesthetic as well, whereas costume designers tend to follow a script. And even if they might let their aesthetic inform some of their decisions, they're usually trying to create more of a story from that script than from their own imagination. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule as well. We take a look at Pat Fields. She started out as a stylist and retailer, and you can really see a lot of her own personal aesthetic in a lot of her work, like Sex and the City and Devil Wears Prada. If, for example, Pat hadn't been the designer on those and she hadn't been able to apply her stylist eye to that script, those two things would look totally different and they wouldn't probably be nearly as iconic as they are. So again, styling is another skill that's actually important for a costume designer to have in their back pocket, but it is not the same job. Next is wardrobe or costumers. This is a term that varies by location. In New York City, this is wardrobe supervisors and set costumers, but different places have different terms for this. So make sure you know what the terms are for your area. Here in New York, we use the term wardrobe to refer to a whole team of people who work alongside, but not necessarily under the costume designer. They're a whole different department and a whole union of their own here, actually. Although on many indie sets, you will see people combine and confuse the two departments. So if you do ever get on an indie set as a costume designer, don't be surprised if people call you wardrobe forever. They're never going to stop doing it, even though it's not correct. So what is the difference? Wardrobe is responsible for the upkeep, care, maintenance, continuity, and dressing of the costumes that the costume designer designs. Basically, on larger sets, costume designers are very rarely on set. They design the looks, they're there for fittings, they're there for maybe the first day that a costume shoots, and that's it. Whereas all the wardrobe people are on set all the time, they are always there, and they are responsible for any cleaning, any maintenance, any repairs, and also making sure that the actor is, for example, wearing the right costume in the right scene, that it looks the same, and that the actors are dressed and ready to go. I will say on smaller productions, you as the costume designer may actually have to take on these duties. Occasionally, they just don't have the budget for a wardrobe team and a costume team. So another skill you will have to have in your back pocket as a costume designer at times. But overall, these are two different jobs. Costumes is the design side, and wardrobe is the maintenance and actual nuts and bolts side. So you can think about it as if they're two different sides, equally important, of one costume coin. Next is costume builder or stitcher. Here's another one where the terminology may be different in your area, but here, this is all the people who build the costumes. Usually they work in a costume shop, or they're a stitcher or on-set tailor that gets called in when needed. This is the perfect job for someone who likes to create, sew, build, but not design. So generally builders are not involved in the design process. They receive a completed sketch or completed research from a designer, and it's their job to make it a reality. Again, if you're working on a smaller project starting out as a baby costume designer, you'll likely have to be building a lot of your own stuff. So this is another set of skills that's important to have as a costume designer, but is its own set of skills and job description on its own too. And the last group is reenactors and cosplayers. Now, here are two parts of the costume world that I get asked about a lot in my real life, and it seems like there's a lot of confusion about this. Reenactors and cosplayers share some similarities with builders, which I just talked about, in that it's heavy on the construction side and the making side. But I would say the two big differences are that one, reenactors and cosplayers generally wear what they build, and two, reenactors and cosplayers are working off pre-existing, pre-created material instead of working off a new original design. So costume builders receive a design from a designer that's usually brand new and just for that production that they're working on, and then they're tasked to build it. Reenactors work from historical research and maybe pre-existing historical garments and recreate it as close to historically accurate as possible. And cosplayers are working from pre-existing media, comic books, manga, video games, what have you, and they're trying to recreate it as close as possible to the look of that original character. So for the most part, reenactors and cosplayers are not involved in film and television. To go back to a point I just made that I feel like it's really important to reiterate, reenactors and cosplayers are the only jobs on this big list that I've been talking about who wear the clothes that they work on. Every other job I'm talking about here, whether you're a fashion designer, stylist, costume designer, wardrobe, or builder, you are not going to be wearing the clothes that you work on. And I feel like this sounds really obvious, but some people go into this kind of forgetting that, and then can get kind of disillusioned or disenchanted when they realize that like they don't actually get to have any of the fun of wearing the clothes. So I feel like it's really important before you go on any path to really look deep inside, think about what makes you happy, and decide if you're, an edit mode or an incredible. Either or is totally great. Now, sometimes costume designers have to wear these hats too. Sometimes you may be doing a historical drama and have to get really deep in the research and learn exactly how to lace up a pair of stays like a reenactor would. And sometimes you may be working on a remake or an adaptation of a comic book and put on your cosplayer hat and learn how to make that costume come to life from the page. You never know. It's another set of skills, yet another. You have to have it in your back pocket. It's now getting a very full back pocket as a costume designer. Okay, let's try to round up all of that information into some kind of nice, neat takeaway. Firstly, what is a costume designer? Always. So a costume designer always works in a team. They are always trying to tell a story through costume, and always trying to design and create clothes that best serve the story, the script, or the overall design of the production. And what is a costume designer? Never. A costume designer is never designing for mass market, never wears the clothes that they design, and is never letting their personal aesthetic be the only determination for the design. And lastly, what is a costume designer? Sometimes. A costume designer sometimes has to look to modern trends, sometimes has to look back to historical research, sometimes has to know how to lead a massive team of costume makers, and sometimes needs to know how to build stuff on their own. A costume designer needs to know how to sometimes make elaborate, out-of-this-world, crazy fantasy costumes, and sometimes needs to know what they can buy from the mall that day to make a character look like how they should. A costume designer sometimes designs the looks and steps away, and sometimes has to stay and do all the washing, all the steaming, and all the ironing. Sometimes. Now, I can say from experience that the job and the tasks you have to do vary on every single production. There is no set list ever. But one thing that runs through it is story and character. So if you're really most passionate about telling a story through clothes and really making characters come to light through costume, then the rest is kind of just there. It's just errands and it's just a means to an end. Once again, this is all my own opinion. This is a huge and varied industry and everybody has their own opinions. But if any of this can help you, I hope it sheds a little light and maybe helps lead you in the right direction for you and what makes you happy. And I'd really like to keep helping and keep providing info to anyone who finds this useful, anybody who's just starting out or thinking maybe this is something they want to pursue. So if you have any questions or any topics you'd like to see me make a video on within the costume design world, leave a comment down below and like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.